On everybody, welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Monday, February 14th of 2022. I'm happy to be back in the saddle here today. First things first, big thank you to Andy and Chris for covering last week. If you missed it, Andy did a prop betting office hours on Wednesday, talking through our new prop betting plan, and then also just some general like prop betting strategy and an understanding of how sports books and sports betting markets work, which was a really informative, interesting video here. I actually just picked that up, watched that this morning, and got that up posted to YouTube. So big thank you to Andy on Wednesday. And then Chris was on here on Thursday hosting normal office hours. That is still on my list to catch back up on that and watch that back this afternoon. Meanwhile, I was down in New Mexico snowboarding, relaxing, taking it easy for a long weekend, which was very nice down there. So excited to be back here today. Hope you guys all enjoyed the Super Bowl. I know we had a number of users, especially on the FanDuel side, have a very profitable night last night. So that's always good to see. I know some DraftKings winners as well. If you were doing any betting on that game or prop betting or anything like that, hope it was profitable for you as well. A very slightly profitable night in DFS for me overall. Didn't do any bets, but always excited to see everybody in the community having success. And then, of course, as always, if it wasn't a profitable night for you or you didn't have as much success, remember, don't feel left out. There are always less winners than losers, even on a given night where the model's really on. So don't fret about that. I have been on the wrong end of that before, where it seems like everybody's winning, even in the SaberSim community, and you're down on the night. That happens, especially in a high variance sport like NFL Showdown. You just have one different piece in the lineup at some min price player. Maybe you didn't have, what was it, Bryson Hopkins or Howard? I don't even know the guy's name, right? If you had some other min price piece in there, you're talking about a drop of like sometimes tens of thousands of spots in the contest. So no worries there. Anyway, excited to get back into it here today. We've got a couple questions here already in the queue. Not too many, not too bad, all things considered. So if you've got questions for me, go ahead, pop them into YouTube chat, pop them into the Office Hours channel in Slack, and we'll kind of just slowly get going here. I will say before we jump right in, a couple things to look forward to, I guess, over the next, I would say, couple weeks. We've been doing office hours, the open Q&A format here quite a bit over the last couple months. But we are going to be kind of rolling back in some more of the strategy sessions over the next couple weeks, as different sports start getting started up, different models come out on the SaberSim side, our new features are coming out. So a couple things to look forward to. Planning on probably having a groups focused strategy session here over the next couple weeks, figuring out what day that's going to look like. We first of all want to make sure that everybody has an understanding of how to use the new groups functionality. Let me get this up on screen, right? I did a quick demo of this last week. But also strategically, right? Want to start talking about, what are the best ways to use these? What are the good ways to use the groups functionality to get better lineups, to get better results out of your lineup? So want to do that. We did put out a new League of Legends sim a couple weeks ago here now that it does not have, I would say, necessarily like full complete support on the front end, right? You can't yet go in and kind of click on a player and see their ranges of outcomes or anything like that. But the League of Legends model is actually now using fully fledged simulations to build out the projections, but also when you're actually building your lineups with sim variants. So kind of want to do another League of Legends kind of stream here, talk a little bit of League of Legends strategy. Been a little while since we did anything esports focused like that. And NASCAR, a common request recently with the NASCAR season really going to get started here this week. We are pushing to get our NASCAR sims out as quickly as possible. As soon as we have that out, probably we'll be doing another stream specifically to talk NASCAR strategy and how the NASCAR model works. So a lot to look forward to on those fronts. Of course, baseball starting to kind of feel like it's coming in pretty quick here. I think the latest rumors I've been hearing are that maybe the odds are looking a little more likely that it's going to start on time. I don't know if that's confirmed yet, but it certainly seems like things are feeling a little more optimistic. So we'll see where things go. Obviously, we'll have a bunch of baseball content coming out once baseball gets a little bit closer. So a lot to look forward to. But today, definitely It is a open Q&A, so we'll go ahead. We'll get started here. And let's get into it. I'm gonna actually go ahead and we'll jump back. Let's pick up some of these questions that came in last week. Before I do that, Edward says that he's getting an echo from me, which is no bueno for sure. Anybody else? Let me know in the chat if anybody else is getting an echo. Haven't really changed much. Still using the same mic setup. And I've got the echo cancellation on here in the app. So maybe if anybody else is getting an echo from me, go ahead and give me a shout and let me know. But okay, Edward says it's on his end. So no worries there. Let's go ahead. Let's jump into some questions here. So I'm going to back us up, talk a little bit here about some of these questions that looks like they came in on Friday here. First one's from John. And John said, the last 2 nights I've late swapped before every new tip-off, no matter if there was news or not. Won a little 2 nights ago and then had my best night ever last night. Is this what I should have been doing all along or just a coincidence? Good question here. Actually, I just realized real quickly. Give me 1 second here. I forgot to change my screen resolution so that you guys can actually see what I'm doing on screen here. So let's do that real quick, so you guys can actually see the app, because I think that's probably a pretty important part of this here. A little rusty coming back in here, but it's all good. All right, cool. Now we're in business. So anyway, let's start over. Last 2 nights, I've late swapped before every new tip-off, no matter if there was news or not. Won a little 2 nights ago. Had my best night ever last night. Is that what I should have been doing all along or just a coincidence? I'll say this. I mean, I think you are probably better served late swapping before every single game starts than not late swapping at all. If there's no news, if there's legitimately no news, like even a situation maybe for the 6 o'clock game, just by chance, let's say we have the starting lineups, confirmed starting lineups for all 3 of these teams when you late swap at 5:30 and then nothing breaks between 6. If you are late swapping at 6 in that particular situation, you're just kind of rebuilding with the same information you had before. Now, the sim variance slider is going to mean that you get a different set of simulations when you build those lineups. So you're going to get different lineups out of them, but you're really just kind of reshuffling. You're probably not actually adding value. But if anything is changing, anything at all, right? Definitely if a player is starting and they weren't expected to, or if a player's gotten ruled out. But even, if we get just a little bit more information about the game, or there's some minutes restrictions or anything at all, right? It is probably adding some little bit of value here to late swap before every game. And if you're unsure when is the right time to late swap, or do I need to late swap for this particular set of games, you're almost always going to benefit from just doing it, because you'll get the opportunity to rebuild and get the most up-to-date information. Now, that's not a guarantee that you're going to win every single night. And if you had your best night ever on, I guess this probably would have been Thursday night, it's probably more likely that variance just swung in your favor for that particular night. Now, if you late swapped before every single game start time, you probably put yourself in the best position for success on that given night, right? But I wouldn't say that this is, kind of the skeleton key that maybe was missing from your process. It's just a very good thing to do. So it's generally what I do on any given slate. Especially as we get into the latter parts of the season here, where news is breaking more frequently, and bigger name players are probably going to start sitting out more often. I think it makes more sense to be a little lighter on the late swap trigger, or heavier, I guess would be the correct analogy, right? Pulling the trigger more easily on just doing a late swap. The one other thing I'll note here too is that when you are going to late swap, because of the way that the builder's currently set up, and since you're just rebuilding the exact number of lineups you need, you are going to, in general, kind of increase your variance of your lineups. So if you have if you have a pool, you've probably noticed this before. If you have a pool of exposures, or your player pool, right? The exposures on your players that you have when you go into lock will generally spread out a little bit. You'll generally get wider exposures, probably get a little bit of a bigger player pool as you late swap, because you're increasing the variance of your lineups, because there's not a pool of lineups behind it, right? You're just rebuilding each lineup once. So I think it's also definitely possible, that as you are late swapping, you kind of allow for some of those higher ceiling outcomes to show up in your lineups, while also allowing some of the lower floor lineups in there, right? Just because that's the nature of kind of just rebuilding the exact number of lineups you need. It is as if you just built with number of lineups equal to pool size from the start, right? Now, I'm not saying that's what I would do, but you do increase the variance of your lineup slightly each time you late swap. So, I mean, again, I think you're, to summarize here, I think you're better off late swapping than not most of the time. If there's truly no new information that has come out, you certainly don't need to. I would not say your best night ever last week. Well, congratulations, by the way, of course. I would not say that's due to finding, kind of a skeleton key here of figuring it out, right? It is not as if the path to binking every night is late swapping before every single start time, but that is the best way to probably put yourself in the best position for success. So good question. Wanted to touch on that one a little bit there, and let's keep it going here. And then there was a good question from Eddie this morning about leverage. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Okay, cool. So he said, been using SaberSim for a couple weeks now. I've watched tons of SaberSim videos on YouTube, still confused by something. In my builds, when I see a player has negative leverage, for example, negative 15.8 leverage, I am thinking I should avoid negative leverage players, and that negative leverage is bad, and the more positive leverage a player has, the better he is to use in my builds. But maybe I'm not thinking about leverage in the right way. Any thoughts on how I should look at positive and negative leverage in my builds? Thanks. Yeah, so this is a really good question. So let's talk about this. I think there's a few different ways to use leverage as it is calculated in the SaberSim app, but it depends a lot on what settings you used for your build and what you are attempting to accomplish with that build. So let's start here and tweak a couple projections here. So that we don't have to do it on step 3, and run a build here and see what we get out of this here. We'll talk about leverage real quick. So okay. Let's see here. Let the lineups pull up. All right. We're in business. Okay, so this leverage column, you can see the little tooltip that pops up here. I don't know if it's super legible for you guys here on the screen, but what is the leverage column? It is your exposure to that particular player in your set of 20 or however many sold lineups minus the projected ownership for the player. It is essentially a percentage, and it is the percentage of lineups more or less that your lineups have relative to the field, right? So what that essentially means is that the players that you have the highest leverage on in your lineup pool are the players that you stand to gain the most relative to the field when that player succeeds, right? We don't get to be the only person that has Seth Curry in our lineups, right? 12% of the field we're expecting to also have that player in our lineup, in their lineups as well, which means that we don't gain any relative advantage over those 12 or specifically 11.6% of lineups, if that number's right, when Seth Curry has a big game. So the reason why we get leverage on a player is so that we do have a relative advantage on the field, right? We get 68.4% of our lineups are positioned to succeed more than the field when Seth Curry has a big game. And negative leverage is the opposite, right? So we can sort this in the opposite order, and you can see the players that we stand to gain the most when and if they fail are generally, going to be the highest projected players that you are either under the field on or fully fading. So in this case, Raul Neto, Luke Kennard, Vucevic, etc. Right? That's what the leverage column is. So on a traditional build that you're building your lineups for the night, it doesn't necessarily. This is more a descriptor. Right? This column is better used to describe your lineups rather than to give you a strategic sense of what to do with your lineups, right? So if you want to see, what are my biggest stands on the slate, you can sort by the positive leverage column and see, these are the players that I'm most invested in. And then you can make adjustments accordingly, right? More or less what this is saying, for example, is that we are equally confident about Jokic, Jordan Nwora, and Quentin Grimes on tonight's slate. Right? That is essentially what's being said here. Now, that may or may not be true for you. So if you wanted to adjust this and said, for example, that I don't know. Maybe I haven't really studied the slate too much here tonight, but maybe Quentin Grimes stands out as somebody that you're not as interested in being as invested in, right? We have the Giannis news with Nora. Jokic is projected for 67 points, like 17 points higher than any other player in the field. So maybe you make an adjustment here to bring your positive leverage to Quentin Grimes down while still staying over the field. Right. And that's kind of a risk tolerance thing that allows us, we're making a decision based on the leverage column, right? A descriptor here of adjusting our risk, or vice versa, right? We can take this another way, right? Maybe we're not comfortable in this particular situation having Vucevic be one of our biggest fades on the slate, right? Maybe one way to do that would be to just set a little bit of a minimum exposure to force some Vucevic into our lineups, right? But it doesn't, it's what I mean when I say it's descriptive is it's just, all it is that you can see the leverage columns changing when I'm adjusting exposures here, right? So you can use it as a tool and then make an adjustment based on that, but it wouldn't necessarily make sense here. I wouldn't necessarily go in and say, oh, I have positive leverage on Seth Curry, right? He's my highest positive leverage player on the slate, so I'm now just going to lock him because he's the highest leverage play on the slate, right? Because that's already kind of being accounted for. It's saying, given Seth Curry's projection and his simulations, given this 11.6 ownership projection, given the contest that we say that we're playing, this is the amount of leverage that is appropriate, at least on this particular build. Now, you can use the leverage column to do, I think, maybe what people are a little bit more used to when they hear the word leverage in the DFS space. And that is more of this objective leverage. Right? Is there, if a player has a greater percent chance to show up in the winning lineup than their projected ownership, right? There is this theoretical leverage that can be realized by rostering that player more than the field owns him, right? And the way that I like to do that, I think that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about DFS and thinking about, using this leverage column. The way that you can do that is you need to run basically a different kind of build. You need to run a build, right? And I think you guys probably see where I'm going, right? With this, if you've watched some of my streams here before. But the way that you would go about doing that is you need to come up with some way to make this exposure column approximate the percent chance of a player showing up in the winning lineup, right? So how can we essentially do that? Well, we can do that by querying or asking the simulations themselves, how often does a player show up in the winning lineup, or what is a good approximation of how often a player shows up in the winning lineup? And I think one way to do that is to run a research build where you turn the factors of correlation and ownership fade off. And I would say generally turn sim variance to 10. Now, if you've watched this before, if you've watched my streams before, you know that I typically am cautious with doing this for NBA for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to get into all those reasons right this second, but because I want to run this build, but you can essentially approximate the percent chance of a player showing up in the winning lineup for how the sims are currently set up by running a build here, right? This turns correlation off, this turns ownership off, and we use a single game simulation for every single lineup, right? We're essentially simulating the slate 1,500 times and building 1,500 lineups, right? So now if we do this, right, we're essentially going to get 1,500 different slate simulations, and we can compare the exposure of a player to the projected ownership along with the leverage column and get this more strategic, is the field overlooking or underlooking, overestimating or underestimating a certain player in the slate, right? Now, while this is building, I'll have an opportunity to talk about it. So I don't do this a lot for NBA for a couple reasons. First of all, because NBA, there's news breaking throughout the slate, news breaks constantly, and this research build that we might do at lock may lose all of its value an hour after lock if the slate has changed significantly. And secondly, because sim variance 10 is not really something that I would actually use very often in NBA because it's a little bit of a lower variance sport. So the percent chance, you don't need single game simulations as much. You don't need that level of variance in your builds to come up with how likely a player is to show up in the winning lineup. But it still works for the purpose of kind of explaining this, right? So now we get a different story. Now we're looking at 1,500 different slate simulations. And we actually see in this case, right, one of our bigger stands on the slate is Jokic, at least in theory, right? He's a player that's showing up in the optimal 31.3% of the time, but we're expecting him to be 47% owned. This leverage now is saying that the Jokic essentially shows up in 15.2% more lineups than his percent chance of being in the optimal for that particular slate. Now, the reason why he was showing up in a lot of lineups in the actual test build is because the variance number was lower, right? We were taking into account other factors here. But this is saying, if you're looking purely to find the optimal lineup, that Jokic might be overowned. Maybe in a very large field type tournament, it might be a player worthy of a fade, right? Seth Curry is a player that shows up here still as a very high positive leverage play, right? It looks like the field is underestimating Seth Curry, at least given the projections and the ownership projections where they are right now, by about a factor of 2, more or less here, right? So again, this is a way you can use the leverage column to do a little bit more of a research-based approach to your process. Now, before I wrap this up, I will say one more time that I would approach with caution doing this for NBA, because you are going to probably have to do multiple research builds throughout the night if you want to do it very tightly, right? And news is going to change. There's a lot of late swap opportunities. Your research build is going to age poorly, basically. And second, because as we just saw it, Jokic can still be a good play in the vast majority of contests, even if he's going to be over-owned compared to his percent chance to be in the optimal lineup, because we don't really need the optimal lineup to beat NBA contests. I like this for high variance sports, and I like this for sports where late swap is less of a factor. I like it for golf. I like this for NHL. I like this for baseball. I like this for a little bit for football. But again, kind of wrapping back to the original question here, the leverage column, strictly what it does is it is just exposure minus ownership. So when you are doing it with a build that you are actually using to build the actual lineups that you're going to play on a slate, it is mostly just a way to describe your lineups. What are my biggest stands? What are my biggest fades in this set of lineups? If you want to use it more like maybe a tool that you have seen elsewhere in the industry, right? There's a lot of different sites that publish a leverage number, right? And for different individual players, what they are essentially doing is something very similar to what a research build where you build 1,500 lineups at 0-0-10 would essentially do. That is more or less what they're trying to do with those kinds of things. So hopefully that was helpful here. And let me know if you have any other questions on that, Eddie. So cool. Eamon said, I'm fresh today. Vacation did me well. Appreciate that. I'm feeling fresh. I'm feeling good. It was a good little break. So I'm back. All right, cool. Let's keep it going here. I think there's a couple other questions. Yeah, a couple other questions in Slack that we'll hop over to YouTube chat. Question from Carl here. And he said, if Giannis or a similar big gun is doubtful, does the SaberSim team automatically raise the projections of the alternative scores on the respective team? Yeah, so our sims will run pretty much automatically when news breaks. So actually, I was looking at this in the NBA lineup alerts channel in SaberSim Slack. It looks like Underdog tweeted that Giannis was doubtful at 11:31 a.m. my time. The first re-sims of the Portland and Milwaukee game started 1 minute later and then completed another minute after that. So we have kind of already run updated sims accounting for the Giannis news. So you can kind of go in here and see, for example, that we're starting to see, some big, well-projected plays showing up, right? A little bit of uncertainty with this team, right? Not entirely clear who's going to start. Projections will continue to dial in throughout the day. There will be more sims, but we have already kind of run updated sims. This happens automatically here. When it happens 7 hours before lock or whatever it was, that's great. Gives you plenty of time. I think you really see the value of how quickly we update, how quickly we resimulate games when this kind of news breaks just a few minutes before lock, because that does happen often. But one of the biggest values of this, I think, is that because we're simulating games, we don't just take Giannis's projection and kind of spread it out, or take his minutes and spread it out amongst other players on the team and let the projections kind of regenerate. Right. What actually happens here is we take Giannis off the court and we actually re-simulate the game play by play 10,000 times. So There will be obviously an increase in usage and minutes to some of these other players. You have these better projected plays, but this also obviously changes the game state overall. And I think as I've kind of watched these sims this morning, you can see that obviously these individual players on the team have become better DFS plays, but the Bucks overall team projection has come down and the Portland team projection overall has come up. So, about as you would expect, right? You take the best player on the court off from the Bucks, their expectation goes down, the Blazers' expectation goes up, but the individual DFS players on the Bucks lineup as a whole all become better plays, right? So, cool. Let's keep it going. Let me hop back to the Office Hours channel here. Question from Edward. Let's see. He said, just to double check, when I set my lineups before the first lock and have a bunch of min and max settings by player, by build type, most specifically GPP 20 max at step 2, not step 1. When I late swap, does the sim remember my min and maxes when I late swap? Okay, good question. So let me go ahead. Let me get some entries. Let me get some entries in here. We'll talk about this. Okay, let's go back to a build. Let's go to this one, actually. Okay, so we have some exposures set here, right? We set Vucevic at 15%. And did we cap anybody? Let's cap somebody just for fun. Let's say, you know what, maybe we're feeling inspired by that research build and we want to actually be under on Jokic, right? And I need 150. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get 150. Okay. So we have 150 lineups, right? So we can click save and we go in here and now we go to our entries file. And let's fill these. Okay, so our exposures will carry over here when we, actually, let me do it like this because this is looking confusing right now. There we go. Okay, so our exposures have carried over, right? So if I was just filling the mini max, for example, here, right, you can see my 50% max exposure, my 60% max exposure, my minimum exposure to Vucevic, right? This is all here. So if I were to go in and download this, right? Download 150, I download, I'm good. Lock has happened here. When you late swap, if you come back here later and late swap, we will honor the minimum and maximum exposures that you see in these two columns as best we can when we late swap, right? So, and that will be persistent. So if you late swap at 5:30 or whatever time it is, whatever time that is for you, 7:30, whatever, 8 o'clock, then 10 o'clock, right? We will continue to keep track of this throughout the night. The caveat to that, the overall kind of caveat, is if these get reset, for example, right, if you've reset your exposures here, or if you upload a fresh entries file, it will remove those exposures, and then we won't know what your exposures were supposed to be, and then we'll kind of just late swap more openly, I guess. So as long as you use the fill contest with lineup button, fill your lineups in from the build that you intended to choose, right? We'll pull in the exposures from that particular build here, and we will keep track of them throughout the night. But if you upload a new entries file or reset your exposures, they're not as easy to get back necessarily in that particular case. The one other thing to note here as well is that if you're filling different contests with different builds, the exposures will change to whatever was used on the most recently filled build, right? So if I had different builds for each of these lineups, it's going to pull in the exposures from the most recently filled contest, the most recently filled build, because we might have 50% Jokic for our 150 max, but we only have, maybe we have him locked for our 3 max, right? So it's going to update to whatever the most recently filled build is here. So just things to kind of look out for there. But yes, I mean, broadly speaking, we will keep track of your minimum and maximum exposures that are in the entry editor as you are late swapping throughout the night. So. Reed says, I need a fresh idea to NBA, Jordan. I late swap, set close to lock, etc. Interesting. It's a tough question to answer. I mean, that honestly, that's it's a big part of my strategy every night, right? I there's not a lot of like secret sauce to my overall NBA strategy beyond that on most nights. Especially, for bigger slates as we're approaching this part in the season. I think that you're getting a pretty enormous edge every single night just based on the fact that news is inevitably going to break and people aren't going to update well behind it. I think it's important to remember too that this is still a high variance game, and it takes a long sample size to realize your expected value or your edge if you have one, right? I think on the NBA season to date right now, I am placing like 1.6% of my lineups, 1.7% of my lineups into the top 1% of the contest, into the contest I'm playing, right? Which I feel like is pretty confident that I have an edge in my process, but I am net down on the year just NBA DFS alone speaking, right? So I haven't necessarily had a chance to fully realize the visible edge that I have, right? And that can happen. I would say, if you are starting to, if you want to add something new to your process, if you're doing that, I would say kind of the general recommended process, especially the one that I preach often, I would say, it can be a good opportunity to jump back, head over to the SaberSim YouTube channel, and rewatch Max's video from the start of the season. Because Max does kind of take, I would say, another layer of research. Actually, I should move this around because NFL is wrapped up now. This video here, Max does do kind of another layer of research and strategy to his particular process, where he dives into injury news a little bit more in a little bit more of a detailed way, looks into some rotations of particular teams and makes more adjustments to projections, especially as we get into this part of the season when, again, players are going to get ruled out a little more suddenly. You're going to see teams probably play with a little bit newer rotations. There's going to be some strange slates coming up, especially as we get to the other side of the All-Star break. I think you can get even more of an edge kind of doing a little bit of your own research and cross-checking, and maybe even just playing a game theory angle of, the Bucks are the easy example tonight, right? But maybe it's a different, maybe to match up against Portland, a different player gets a little bit more run, or something like that. So, spending a little bit more time researching how teams might play with key players off the court, or what recent rotations might look like, or how teams might match up to one another, and making adjustments to projections, I think can be an interesting idea. I think another interesting idea, and something that I have at least kind of explored recently, is a couple weeks ago we had a segment here on Office Hours where I can't remember who I was talking to, but we were going back and forth and kind of talking about the value of research builds in NBA. And on stream, I would say, kind of organically came to this idea that you can use a research build almost as a hedge against a slate where there isn't a good late swap opportunity. And what I mean is, I always come on here and I say, well, I don't like to use research builds as much for NBA because news is going to break and it's going to invalidate that research build. And that might be true, but we don't know when or if that's going to happen. And I think one thing that would be interesting, or something that I haven't really had a chance to really mess with too much, but I think is an interesting way if you want to add a little bit more value, is to play an ownership angle, right? With either a research build or your own way of coming up with leverage for players, or your own way of determining who you think is going to be over or under owned on the slate, right? And play kind of a very leveraged ownership-based approach to NBA, and then abandon it essentially if throughout the slate you get a late swap edge, right? So basically build your lineups at 5 as if you have perfect information about the projections for every single team and perfect ownership as if you couldn't late swap at all. But then if at 7 o'clock we get huge news that something has changed, right? And maybe a key player is out, maybe Gobert's out again. Maybe Gobert and Pascal are out again, and now you have some Jazz value. Then abandon that research build, or that leverage calculation, or that ownership-based approach that is now kind of less valuable, and late swap normally, right? And if that happens at 5:30, then abandon it then, right? But basically allow that kind of ownership game theory based approach to carry you as long as it can throughout the slate. And I actually think that's really interesting. I've wanted, I kind of thought about this idea, or we talked about this idea a couple weeks ago, and then obviously went on the vacation. I haven't really had a chance to like actually mess around with that, but I think it's pretty cool. And I think it would be a good way to incorporate that into your process. The last thing I'll note on this particular question is, there was an answer in the actual in Slack. I can't remember. I saw you posted this somewhere else. Maybe it was the NBA channel. And I think there was an interesting discussion about it in Slack. Yeah, from Shady Advice here. And he recommended playing multiple slates throughout the night and branching out into the showdowns and the turbos and the night slates and things like that. And that, while that's not really a strategic change or kind of a process change so much, what it is it is a way to give yourself a path to realizing your edge more quickly, right? Because we mentioned here right at the start of this question is that it's a high variance, still a high variance game. It takes time to realize the edge that you have. Playing turbos, playing showdowns, playing the different slates that are available to you on a given night is just going to give you more shots on goal, give you a greater % chance of realizing your edge more quickly. And it's also going to allow you to weather the swings a little bit more too. Because, let's say you have an overall kind of down night, but your approach to the San Antonio and Chicago showdown was pretty dialed in. You can win back a lot of your equity just on that one showdown alone. So I would say that's kind of my answer here. I guess in summary here, right? Remember, it's a high variance game, takes a long time to realize your edge, and to approach with some patience. Make sure that you're using strong bankroll management and contest selection principles in the first place. Second, if it resonates with you, if it feels like something you can do and you want to go this direction, check out Max's video, the way he approaches player projections, rotations, updates to projections and that kind of form of research. I think that can be a really interesting way to add some value, especially at this point in the season. I do think the idea of using a research build or playing a very ownership leveraged strategy at the start of the slate and adjusting as late swap opportunities present themselves to you throughout the slate is a really interesting idea and something that I personally kind of want to explore a little bit more, and update your contest selection strategy to incorporate more slates to smooth out your variance. I think would be kind of my big three. If you're looking, if it's been a rougher season for you to this point, and you're looking for something to kind of freshen up. But that's what I would do. But what I would not do is like burn the whole process down or anything like that. Because again, we're talking about really what has only been about half of a single NBA season right now. And if you've watched this video on our YouTube channel, again, down at the bottom, Office Hours Greatest Hits, right? I've demonstrated pretty clearly on stream before here that even for a 100 slate sample size, which is more than the amount of main slates we have in a given NBA season, right? Even for a player that is 100% like known profitable long-term, you can still you can be negative over the course of a whole season, right? That's in the range of outcomes for everybody that's playing DFS, right? For me, for you guys, for anyone, right? Really, no matter how sharp that player is. So, but anyway, good question. And let's go ahead and keep it going here. And let me know if there's any follow-up. I know that one's kind of open-ended. Always a tougher question when it's kind of like, what else can I do? Or like, what next? But I'm happy to answer any follow-up there as well. So John said, can we build a complete roster without having any SaberSim players? I'm a little confused by this one. I don't really know what you mean here. Let me know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this here. Yeah. Maybe give me a little more context there, John, and I'd be happy to come back to this one. Crypto Artist said use the Sims for NFT Showdown. Whoa. NFT Showdown sounds kind of fun. I assume that's NFL Showdown. Finished first and shared with many, but the fact that I had the best lineup really is interesting. Oh yeah, I corrected and said NFL. Yeah, congratulations. I know, again, it was, I think, a pretty good night for a lot of SaberSim users for the Super Bowl last night. So again, big congratulations to everybody that did well there. And again, remember, if you didn't, or if you broke even or lost money, right? That's all. It's within the range of outcomes. There's a lot of variance in NFL Showdown, right? Just a singular different player in the lineup is a massive swing in where that lineup is likely to place. So, cool. What other questions do we have here? I don't see any other questions in the queue. Let's see. So John said choose all 9 players. So it sounds like, John, you're basically asking, can you build a good lineup hand built? Right? That's like basically what I'm reading here. Right? The simple answer to that is yes. I mean, you could end up with a lineup that is well constructed, well correlated, well leveraged against ownership, has a high expected value by hand. There are successful hand builders out there. But I think it's a lot of work. And I think it's unnecessary, to be completely honest. I would say, if you like the approach of playing a single lineup, there are people out there that want a single lineup, right? I would, first of all, let me say this. I would recommend multi-entering when you can, because you are, again, going to smooth out your variance, give yourself a greater % chance of realizing your edge. But if you like to play one lineup, right, that's fine. I would say you might as well take advantage of the things that SaberSim is automating for you, right? It is so easy to make a mistake hand building a lineup. You have very limited information available at your disposal, right? And it's very easy to make a mistake hand building a lineup. It's very hard to build a very good hand built lineup, right? What I would say is, if you were taking that approach, what I would recommend instead is have SaberSim build you a pool of lineups from which to work with, right? Build 500 lineups that are well optimized to the single entry contest you're playing, right? And then leave your mark on it here, right? Lock a couple of the players that you wanted in there. Remove a couple of the players that you didn't want in there. And maybe SaberSim will say, okay, well then you have 20 lineups left, right? Here's what's left for you here, right? Maybe you've decided that you're taking an aggressive stand and you're going to fade Jokic, right? Like what then what does the lineup look like, right? And kind of build the lineup this way, rather than completely hand building yourself, right? And maybe you make a decision, maybe you play, I don't even know. Maybe you play DeJounte Murray, right? And show me 3, right? I want 3 options, right? So there you go. Now, and you could go further than this here. So, but let's go ahead. Let's keep it going here. David said, I did a group rule build on Friday, but when I late swap, do those rules apply anymore? They should. Let's see. Let's try one here. So it may require you to load them in yourself. So let's do this for fun here. Let's do 1,500 and let's set a group just for fun. I don't know if this is a group that I would use. I might. I think it's at least something interesting. Less than 2 of Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton. Don't ever use these 2 players together in the same lineup, right? So one thing to note here. Okay, actually, you know what? Let's just try this. So we have our rule in, and let's do this. And let's build. I built 1,500 here out of habit. But we'll go ahead. What we'll do, we'll build the lineups. We'll fill them into my entries file here. We'll download them, and then we'll kind of try a late swap and see if the group still shows up. And then before I move on, I'll show one other thing here. David said, I had either a rule of either Chris Paul or Booker did late swap, and both were not in my lineup either anymore. So it sounds like you had must like at exactly 1, I assume was the rule. You must have like exactly 1 Chris Paul and Booker. Well, let's take a look here. So we can first, let's audit this and make sure that this worked correctly. And that we had, where's our guy? Middleton and no Drew. Cool. Okay, so it worked correctly. So these look good here now. Saved. Okay, now let's go over to the entries. So I think this is going to work here, right? I think it should. But I want to test this. I want to kind of test this live here. So our 150, right? So now the one thing we want to check is when we go into, oh, and let's download. So it actually goes in there. Download 150. Okay. Okay, and now we're going to late swap. We're only late swapping this. So, I mean, the one thing to check here is to make sure that the rule has actually persisted, right? I think it's like worth just doing a quick check and make sure that your rules are still in here, right? Also, generally, I would say a good practice would be to just save these, especially if it's like something that you use often, so that it's, in case it does get deleted, you can just reload it, but it is still in here. And then if we late swap now, the rule should still be honored here. David said, okay, it is just me, lol. Thank you. Yeah. And it's entirely possible that there is a bug here. The things to look for, I would definitely, keep an eye out, make sure that rule is actually persisting here. And that it's showing up, but let's make sure here that we actually get this working the way that we expected here, but I think it probably will. So now we have, so let's see, our Middleton has, so we're still in business with this particular rule. We have our Middleton, and our Middleton includes no Drew Holiday. So I think it worked. If you run into more issues, I think I would probably use the report a problem link in the settings page. Send us over here. Let us know what you did, and we can take a look. Obviously, with these rules here and these groups, there's like a lot of different combinations of players and logic and different things that you can do here. So we've tested this out quite a bit. It's entirely possible that there's something in the logic somewhere that maybe we missed too. I haven't used the exactly one of rule, right, too much. So like another way of doing this would be to say, exactly equal to one, right? Similar kind of situation where I don't want both, but I know I want one in every single lineup, right? Which is the rule it sounds like you're describing. I haven't used this too much, but let us know if you have any more issues there. So see, Ryan's got a betting parlay. AO under 7.5 assists, Curry under 6.5, Van Vliet under 3.5 rebounds, Kuzma under 4.5 assists, Randall under 23.5 points. Needed a betting sweat. Good luck. It's a little early for me to do my NBA props. I've been living with a little bit tougher lines or tougher odds to beat, just so I can have as much information as possible. Yeah, good luck. All right, let's see. There was a question here, a follow-up question from Edward in Slack. Let's get to this one real quick here. He said, follow-up. If I load right before lock, usually 6 my time, and want to late swap at 6:30, don't I have to reload my lineups, or do the Sims know what locks have happened? Again, I thought that I had to reload after each lock. Is that not true? That's not true. So as long as you've refreshed this page, right? So let me put it this way. The only situation that we would not know what games have already started is if you went in, you fill your lineups at lock, you download, you upload to the sites, and then you just immediately walk away from this page and don't touch a thing, right? And then if you come back later and then just start hitting swap, it's possible at that point we won't know what games have started. But as long as you've at least pressed this button, or if you navigate away from this page and come back to it later, or just refresh your browser, we will know automatically which games have started. You do not need to upload a fresh entries file for us to know what games have started. So my practice, what I do, just to be sure, is that every single time I come to late swap, I will just click this before I do it so that it refreshes, uploads, resets all the projections, and we're good to go. That's my practice. I think that's the easiest thing to do. So, but no, I know that came up recently in another question in another channel on Slack or something. So we don't get the information about what games have started from the entries file itself. We know that already. And we know that just based on the time of the games and what time it is. So, but the page has to be refreshed, or you have to refresh projections for that to happen. So, all right. What else we got? About 50 minutes here now. Any other questions for me here on this Monday? It's been a fun little stream. We've talked a little bit of late swap strategy, some broader NBA DFS strategy, a couple entry editor, late swap nuances, things like that. So pretty good little start to the week. I'll leave this open here. We'll stay on for another couple minutes, see if any other questions come in while we have the time, and then we'll think about wrapping it up. I guess while I have the time here, while I have a moment, I would highly recommend, if you didn't get a chance to check it out and you're interested in sports betting or prop betting, to go back and watch Andy's prop betting strategy session. It's up now on our YouTube channel here, Beating Prop Betting with SaberSim. Again, kind of talks through our new prop betting plan, but also some just broader betting strategies. I found it really interesting. I enjoyed that video a lot. And if you like it and want to get involved in SaberSim's new prop betting plan, DM SaberSim Ross in Slack, and he'll get you added to the wait list to join that. But I think Andy mentioned that we are up 56 units for the NBA season on this plan. So pretty impressive stuff there. Still plenty of time before the end of the NBA season, and then obviously baseball coming around the corner. So definitely check that out. And look forward to, we'll be back here for office hours, open Q&A at least tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern. But as the week goes on, looking forward to doing a couple strategy session type streams here for NASCAR, for the groups functionality, for maybe the League of Legends model here over the next couple weeks. So more info to come there, but I don't see any other questions trickling in here for now. So on that note, we'll leave it there. Good luck tonight if you're playing NBA, if you're playing hockey DFS. There is, since the League of Legends model has come out, I've been hitting the League DFS pretty hard. There is a 2-game Chinese League slate that is at like 2 o'clock in the morning my time overnight tonight. So good luck if you are playing League DFS. Otherwise, see you all tomorrow, same time, same place tomorrow. So until then, take care.